We're going to give this just a couple more minutes for people to be able to sign on. We'll get started about 9:05. Good morning, Rhonda. It's great to see so many faces this morning, or screen names, I guess. This is a nice turnout. I don't know about you guys, but I'm sure I cannot wait for the day we get back to doing this in person. A couple of highlights while people are still signing on. Some of you may notice on the screen, we have closed caption available. This is a new thing that we're adding. If you don't see it signing up or showing up, there should be a button on the bottom of your, could be on the bottom or on the top of your screen that allows you to choose that option if you'd like that. As we tested this, it's reasonably accurate. It's not 100%. As you can imagine, some things are hard to understand as people say them, but that's the new feature that we're including in our meetings. Okay, I'm gonna check with Matt to see if you feel like we have most of the people who have signed on in the room, or if we have a number of others who are still joining.
I think we're good to go. We have 28 participants.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you all for joining us this morning. On behalf of myself and Dr. Robin Shook, the director of Weighing In, I want to welcome you all to our second quarterly meeting of 2021. And it feels like the 100th virtual meeting that we've had, although it's not even close, although I'm sure many of you have had over 100 virtual meetings over the past year. We're really looking forward to doing this again in person. I'm Shelley Summer. I hope most of you know me. I recognize most of the names and faces, but if you don't know me, I'm the manager of the Weighing In program at Children's Mercy, working to promote healthy lifestyles through community collaboration. And I want to introduce the rest of the Weighing In team. Matt Kleinman, you've already heard this morning. He's helping us this morning with technology and troubleshooting. Emily Meisen-Sebelius is also on, along with Elizabeth Wilson and Bryce Miller. So again, I want to go through a few housekeeping items before we turn it over to our speaker this morning. Please include your name on your screen so that we know who all is with us this morning. I do want to ask that you mute yourselves during the presentation so we avoid echoes or background noise. You may want to consider changing your view to the presenter view so you can see the person speaking along with the slides. And we will have the presentation available both as slides and as a recording. You should have already noticed that the recording started. And if you have any issues with that, you can either let us know or turn your screen off or your camera off if you're uncomfortable with that. I already mentioned closed caption as a new option. We're really pleased that that is something that is available now. And I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide so you can see the agenda. We're going to start with our presentation. We'll give updates on each of the KC physical activity plan sectors. There'll be an opportunity for other people to share updates as well. So if you have any, there'll be a time in there. And the other thing I want to point out is today we're going to have breakout rooms at the very end of our meeting. So the way it's going to work, and we'll give more information as we break out into the rooms, but you'll be able to choose the breakout room you'd like to participate in. You should see a breakout option on your screen as part of the control panel, so to speak. That's probably not the right term, but if you're not seeing that show up, then you may need to quickly update your Zoom to get the most recent version so it does show up for you there. We'll give you some more instructions about joining the breakout room when it's time. And if you have any questions, feel free to post those in the chat and we'll try to answer them as best as we're able. So without any further ado, I am going to turn it over to our speaker. We're really happy to have Dr. Gina Bassini with us this morning. She is going to be speaking on the mental and physical health benefits of exposure to nature and nature-based physical activity. She's an assistant professor and director of the Physical Activity Research in Community Settings Lab in the Department of Kinesiology at Kansas State University. Her research explores how built environments contribute to physical activity and population level health. Within this broader field of health promotion, she has a specific interest in the role of parks and nature and how active use of green community resources influences physical activity and reduces population risk of chronic disease and related mortality. So we're really pleased to have her with us this morning. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so she can. And as we're making that transition, some of you may have seen Gina present at a previous weighing-in meeting. And we're really pleased to have her as a research partner with all of the things that we're doing, especially related to the physical activity plan. So with that, I'm going to mute myself and I'm going to turn it over to Gina.
Thank you, Shelley. I'm really happy to be here again today, guys. Thank you so much for having me. Again, my interest is really promoting physical activity, but I have a specific interest in getting people outdoors and outside. And so you'll hear me refer to that as nature-based physical activity or outdoor-based physical activity throughout the presentation today. A few years ago, I had the chance to come and talk about park prescriptions, which I am very much an advocate for, healthcare professionals prescribing time outside. And so you'll see that kind of incorporated into some of my thoughts today. But so today I'm going to touch just a little bit on, how getting outside and being active outside is really important for your mental health as well as your physical health. And then I'll touch a little bit at the end with some evidence and some ideas about how to improve getting people outdoors and how to develop spaces that they can feel safe in. So at any point in time, if you guys have questions, this is, I try to be as informal, so feel free to ask questions, or if I present something you don't understand, just let me know, and I'm happy to stop a minute and talk more about any particular topic. So again, I do have a research laboratory at K-State, and I've collaborated with Children's Mercy and folks in Kansas City Parks and Rec in the past, and so this is a really cool opportunity for me to reach out again and talk with everyone. So after the presentation, if anyone wants to chat further, I'll provide my contact information as well as the slides. So I'm sure you guys are all, in this group are all experts on, how beneficial physical activity is. So today I'm going to just focus in on the particular benefits of being in natural settings and in outdoor spaces. And it's not really a new concept, this idea of spending time outside for our health. Hippocrates was one of the first ones to focus on the medical practice and natural approach to the treatment of diseases. And I really like this quote that talked about how the physician treats, but nature heals. And I thought that really resonates and kind of sets up sort of my mentality for how I approach a lot of this stuff. And the ancient Greeks also believed that mental and physical health were very interrelated. And so when we talk about physical activity, I never just think about the physical benefits. I always include things like the mental and social benefits, which you'll see in the presentation today. So much of the information that I'm going to start with today stems from work that I do with a group called PAPRIN, which is Physical Activity Policy Research and Evaluation Network. Particularly, I serve on a working group called Parks and Green Space, and I've provided that link at the bottom of the screen. And one of the particular things that we focus on in this working group is to better understand the connection between nature and health. And our goal is to summarize and help disseminate the most recent evidence that connects nature with these health outcomes. So currently, some of the information that you'll see today, I don't have citations on because it's currently under review with the Journal of Healthy Eating and Active Living. But our goal with providing some of this information is to help researchers or practitioners have evidence at their fingertips to be able to develop policies and programs that can promote time outside outdoor physical activity. So some of the evidence that I'll present today kind of fall into 4 categories. I'll talk about some of the physical health benefits, the mental health benefits, cognitive health benefits, and social health benefits. So starting off with physical health benefits, they're probably one of the least research category out of all the ones that I just named, especially in terms of clinical health outcomes. So when we go to promote outdoor activity, tying it to a drop in blood pressure or improved cholesterol. We know that about regular physical activity, but there are fewer studies showing specifically for outdoor physical activity. However, the few studies that have been done that have used experimental design and been a really strong study have some promising results showing that the physical benefits of being in natural spaces, it can improve your immune system and increase your metabolism, lower your BMI, all these great things that we know physical activity in general already does for us. I also wanted to point out that there's been a lot of links between outdoor physical activity and the risk or prevalence of disease. So if you think about people that spend more time outside are less likely to be obese, less likely to have things like metabolic syndrome. It improves the risk of asthma. Sometimes asthma is kind of a mixed result because of the amount of allergies that can trigger asthma. But we do know that there's a lower risk of cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes, mortality. So all of these risk of disease goes down the more time that people are spending outside. So let's get to some nuts and bolts of some of the cool things about mental health benefits. So when I spoke with Shelley about presenting today, I really think it's important that as we develop physical activity policies and plans, that we recognize that these are mental health plans as well, because of the direct link between physical activity and mental health, particularly those that spend more time outside being active. There's a lot of research it's very well established how it can improve your mood, your energy. It can help you to relax. In children and adults, it improves self-esteem. People report higher quality of life. We also see a reduction in sort of negative side effects of our everyday lives, such as people that spend more time outside are less likely to be stressed. It helps reduce levels of anxiety. Rumination is this concept of constantly thinking negative thoughts. And then it actually has a direct link with lower rates of clinical depression. And so one of the projects that my lab works on right now is working with mental health facilities to regularly take their peer groups to the park, because we know that being time spent outside like that is actually linked with better clinical outcomes for those that have diagnosed anxiety, stress, or depression. So I wanted to just touch base that this is a really important factor when you're thinking about developing physical activity plans and working in this realm, and that there's a lot of evidence out there you can tie directly into mental well-being. Some of the less known or less talked about benefits include cognitive benefits. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about things like there's some studies out there that show that children that spend more time outside have better attention spans. So you might have heard something about the importance of having recess during school time to help children learn better. And so some of that recommendations come from these studies that show that attention is better the more time that you spend outside. There's direct links with improved memory, attention span. We know that social interaction time is increased when you spend time outside. You're more likely to interact with others, and this is especially important for child development. We know that it can improve brain development, and we've seen higher scores for academic performance and intelligence tests. But there's also some other sort of, I put them in the realm of cognitive benefits, which are some cool things that we found about people spending time outside. And that's that sometimes they don't think of the activity they're doing as hard or exercise. So when people go for a walk outside, they think about it differently than when they go to the gym and walk on a treadmill. The perception of effort is typically less when they're walking outside versus when they're having to think about it ahead of time and they get it in their mind that it's labeled as exercise. That changes how they perceive how hard they have to work. So maybe there's more preparation time, or maybe because they think this is exercise and supposed to be sweating, and so they interpret it as being harder. But when you're outside, we don't have that, right? So and that should be a down arrow, I apologize. The perception of the effort actually goes down when you're outside. The frequency and duration of the time that you spent being physically active is typically more outside. Sometimes we don't always think of all of it as exercise, so we don't count it as often when we report it. But even if you say are going to the park to read a book, getting off the couch, getting in your vehicle, even if you're not walking to the park, getting in your vehicle, getting to a bench in the park is going to be more steps and more walking than if you were reading a book on your couch at home. And most people don't think of that as being activity, but it counts towards our accumulation and reaching physical activity guidelines. There's also a lot of evidence that because people aren't thinking of it as strenuous exercise, that they actually enjoy physical activity time more when they are in outdoor natural settings, and they're more satisfied with that time. And that is a really important finding for us because it can help improve long-term physical activity adherence. We obviously want to make physical activity something that's a lifelong behavior that people don't dread doing. And so if you look at some of the evidence, sometimes people are like, oh, I really don't want to go to the gym, or I don't want other people to be watching me exercise. But when people go outside, they think about it differently and they enjoy it more. And so it leads to improved long-term adherence to the behavior. Finally, I wanted to touch on that exposure to physical activity in outdoor settings has a lot of social health benefits. So starting off with, socialization opportunities. It's kind of a no-brainer, but if you leave the house and you're outside in your community where other people are, you're more likely to interact with them. You're more likely to talk to other people, meet new people, maybe run into your neighbors and have conversations that you probably wouldn't have had if you had stayed at home and done physical activity inside or in your backyard even. And so having these increased opportunities for socialization has a lot of social health benefits that can lead to improved health outcomes. And so because of that improvement in social opportunities, we see some of these other social variables improve, such as social support, which is the concept of having, family or friends or other people that you can turn to in times of need. And we know that having a good social network of people is very, very strongly tied to our health. Social capital is this concept that involves sort of an overall social relationship between individuals. And then social cohesion, these are a lot of terms that we find in the literature. focuses on sort of the shared understanding. So it's this concept of being able to know people with the same values that you have, that you understand some of the social norms, what's appropriate in certain settings, and sort of a general idea of like, can you trust your neighbor? So if you wanted to go borrow a cup of sugar from your neighbor, this idea that if you have more outdoor community settings where you get to interact on a regular basis, you're going to maybe know your neighbor a little better and feel more comfortable going and borrowing that cup of sugar type of thing. Or maybe I should say borrow an apple, right? Get something healthy. And then there's actually some studies tied to social mobility, which refers to the ability to sort of move between social statuses. So particularly social economic status, that if you have these outdoor community settings that you can interact in, then there is some evidence to show that you spend less money on healthcare needs, and that you might see more mobility between lower socioeconomic status being able to rise up to a medium or higher socioeconomic status, which is a really interesting finding that we can tie that back to sort of some of these built environments in our communities. So that's sort of a summary of a lot of the findings that we are going to be presenting in this paper that will be coming out. I know that was a whole ton of information, and I'm happy to chat more at the end of that today. But I wanted to sort of switch and say, okay, we know that we have all of these benefits, but why do we still have a job to do in health promotion and physical activity promotion? We have all these amazing benefits, but the problem is that most people spend the majority of their time indoors. There's a study done by the EPA a few years ago that actually showed that Americans spend over 90% of their time indoors. Roughly 87% of that is indoor in some sort of a building, and another 6% in automobiles. Commuting, maybe not this last year, commuting went down probably a little bit with COVID and a lot of our Zoom meetings, but we also found that screen time and indoor time actually increased because people were tied to their computers for work rather than walking to meetings into other buildings and so forth. So, but really, what does that mean? That we're talking about all this great benefits of time outdoors, but on average, people only spend about 7% of their entire life outdoors, which I find incredibly heartbreaking. And you can see on this little depiction here that I put up, that there's reasons why we spend time indoors, right? We have to work, and a lot of us are in an office. We have to commute. Sometimes when we get home, we're a society that works a lot of hours, and we feel very tired when we get home. And a lot of people sit inside, do screen time. And so there's a lot of things pulling for our attention. So yeah, there's a lot of things that contribute to it, but there's a couple of things specifically that I wanted to point out today that I thought might be helpful for your group of why people might spend time indoors. And the first one is talking about safety. So while there are a lot of things reasons why someone might not spend a lot of time outside, one thing that we might have some control over is how safe the environment is, these community spaces that provide such great resources. So we know that, especially related to physical activity, that being afraid in an outdoor space, either a fear from crime or a fear from traffic, can negatively impact participation in physical activity. And that's true especially for women, and I should say for children, although I don't have the particular study cited here. We know that when you are by yourself, solitary activities are often perceived more unsafe than if you can go out as a group, whether that's same gender or mixed gender groups. But this one article really pointed out that if we have safety concerns, there are several consequences that we see in terms of physical activity, right? Overall, we see reduced participation in physical activity. We sometimes will modify our participation pattern. So that means that we might go out more on the weekend versus the weekday. or vice versa, that we might try to spend time outdoors, maybe in an early morning hour versus an afternoon or evening hour when we perceive the time to be slightly more unsafe. We know that people will change their location of physical activity, like they might not go to a specific, say, park after dark because they know that it's an unsafe place. Instead, they'll go to a different space. And so that might actually be moving from an outdoor setting to an indoor setting where people feel safer. We've also seen that they change partners, so that they specifically, maybe instead of taking their kids, that they don't take children out. That they might go with another person, which then makes their behavior contingent on that other person. And we know sometimes that can lead to cancellation of plans or so forth. We also know that people that are afraid and it's tougher to sort of schedule and figure out how to be physically active in those spaces can decrease how much they enjoy doing it. And sometimes they'll be like, oh, it's just not worth the effort. And obviously, if you're worried about safety, it sometimes reduces some of your spontaneity, you know, that you can't just, oh, it's 9 o'clock at night, I think I'll go for a walk. And you have to kind of increase your planning. No, I need to make sure I have someone with me, or I need to make sure I go a little bit earlier before the sun sets. And so it makes things a little bit harder when we don't have safe environments. Fortunately, there's a lot of evidence that shows that how we create the built environment can lead to changes in social norms, which can then address safety from crime and traffic-related safety, which both can improve physical activity levels. So just to provide, I know the slides might be a little bit dry, but just to provide a little bit of evidence, this graph is from a meta-analysis, which is a big fancy term for basically combining data from a bunch of different studies. They're most often used to assess like clinical effectiveness of interventions. In this case, it does this by combining data from randomized control trials. So these studies are very strongly organized studies that can really precisely measure the effect of one thing on another. And so that gives a lot of weight to the findings that we're seeing. And when we combine all these different studies together here, you can see that we can find what is the average or the common effect among all of these studies. And so here we can see that from these 15 different studies, that participants who report feeling safe from crime have a 27% greater odds of achieving higher levels of physical activity. So this is, again, just a slide providing evidence that you can say, hey, you know, we really need to link crime rates in the area with physical activity. And this particular slide is about perceived crime, right? If I feel it's unsafe, if I don't think it's safe outside, then that directly affects my level of physical activity. Whereas on the next slide here, this study actually also looked at police reported crimes, so crime reports. So sometimes we see that there's a difference in how people perceive a place being safe and whether or not it's actually got a lot of crime going on there. And this study shows that, you know, when there are higher police reported crimes in an area, people have a 28% reduced odds of having physical activity in those spaces. So again, just providing some of that evidence that not only is it the actual crime that's happening, but we also have to do some work to change people's perceptions of whether that place is safe or not. So there's kind of work on both sides. We can change the built environment, we can implement policies, eyes on the street, you know, having it patrolled more often. But if people aren't aware of those changes, and that's the piece that might still mean that you're not seeing a change in their physical activity behavior. So I do have a couple of studies that show that this is the same for a lot of different age groups, because I talked before about how sometimes men and women perceive safety a little bit differently. This particular study in older adults found that specifically when we talk about that perceived safety, It's more strongly related to women being physically active. But when we talk about actual police reported crime, that was more strongly related to physical activity among men. So there is a difference between how we perceive and what's actually going on in a place, and then that's actually related to gender-specific physical activity. And this is true for when we talk about children. I know this group focuses a lot on getting to and from school. I saw some working groups about getting to and from school, so I thought I would put in this specific study that shows that these perceptions of safety and crime are particularly important when we're thinking about parents and whether parents are going to let their children be out in a space and be active. So whether that's playing in the neighborhood, or this particular study is looking at children walking to school. And so they're looking at a couple things, right? They think, okay, well, the walkability of a neighborhood is probably pretty important for whether children, walk or bike to school. But they're also saying, that is also influenced by how safe the parent feels letting their children walk or bike to school. And so the main finding here is that both are important, right? Children that had parents that had lower safety concerns were 5 times more likely to walk or bike to school at least once a week than compared to parents that really had safety concerns about the neighborhood. So just to kind of touch on some of the things that I present on when I teach students at K-State, and I know you guys probably are all very aware of some of these tricks, but I like to show a good visualization, is that it's important to design our built environments to reduce this idea of both safety from crime and safety from traffic. We can design these things into our streetscapes. And so this is just an image showing some differences of things that we can do to help make the street feel safer. One of the things specifically we talk about safety from traffic is having, beyond crosswalks, having different even textures of the material that you're walking on. So you can see a lot of crosswalks are made with a brick or it's a colored space. You can see that adding in trees, even in the middle so that traffic can't cross over that median. The addition of bike lanes on either side of the road to have protected spaces can make you feel safer. You'll notice, especially on the right side of the right picture, that there's a nice big strip of green grass that provides sort of this distance barrier from traffic. And all of these things can help you feel like it's a more inviting space, a safer space to walk or bike or be physically active. So I just thought I would point out, I know this group is probably well versed in some of the techniques and tricks of improving safety from traffic. In terms of safety from crime, you'll see a lot of times things like buildings being set very close to the road so that storefronts or porches can mean that you can be seen. So if you were walking along and got mugged, what's the likelihood that someone would see you? And so that's that concept of eyes on the street. We also know that things like lighting, regular patrol, sometimes my husband is in law enforcement, and some of the tricks they do are sometimes even just parking an empty police car in a neighborhood to make people think that it's more likely to be patrolled, because sometimes they don't always have the staffing to patrol everywhere. And so sometimes they'll park what they call a shell car in neighborhoods, and they'll move it around to make sure people realize that that they do patrol the neighborhoods. But that way it's more visually there all the time. So some other things we can do to improve safety in sort of these shared spaces or neighborhoods. Lighting, alarms, phones or emergency buttons along paths and trails. The more frequent that we have transit stops, you're more likely to have traffic and people coming through, getting off and on. We talked about the eyes on the street housing or building designs where we have shop fronts or porches where people are going to be seeing things that are going on. There's also a lot of evidence about organized neighborhood watches or walking groups. Even something as simple as placing sidewalks on both sides of the street so people don't have to cross the street as much. Having bike lanes, traffic calming mechanisms, there's evidence to link all of these things. So one of the lesser discussed elements of sort of the improving safety of a space, we tend to think about a lot of the built environment changes that we can make. But I wanted to touch on how creating spaces that improve social capital are linked back with improving physical activity and improving safety and therefore mental health. And so social capital is directly related to a reduction in crime, but also improved economic development and a lot of other positive community level outcomes, individual level outcomes. But there's sort of, so I'm linking a couple of these concepts together here, saying that, the more walkable we create neighborhoods, the more community spaces we can provide, we can link that with social capital. So making communities stronger. So that social support and that social capital when we can have those shared spaces. And so one of the studies I wanted to show was this idea of sense of community. When we create these spaces, the sense of community improves, like that you are a part of that community, that you feel like you have a good social network within that community. And so we know that having that sense of community is related to walking. It's related to home ownership. It's related to seeing other people that you know, seeing your neighbors out in public. And that's what we want to promote. And all of these things then are linked back to our physical activity patterns. So this particular article talked about the sense of community is related to how we set up our retail spaces, how we set up our parking spaces, a lot of elements of urban design, how we have streetscapes. And so having mixed use between residents and retail spaces, how even hilly places are all linked back to how we use those spaces and how we relate to one another. So, another term that's sort of tied into this is this idea of collective efficacy. It's another term we hear, and that's how much we trust one another, which links back, of course, to this perception of safety. And so we know that spaces have more parks. People report higher levels of collective efficacy, that they can go to the park, they can see people that are their neighbors, they can get to know them, and that builds trust and a mutual sort of willingness to help each other out. So again, back to borrowing an apple or something from a neighbor, right? And that we know that our environmental features that we create, the policies we create, set the stage for these social interactions. So all of these terms that I'm talking about today are just to offer some information about why, when you think about creating physical activity policies or plans, that it's bigger than just getting people to be active. It's getting people to be out in their community, to know one another, to interact with one another, to reduce perceptions of crime, to make them feel safer and more involved with their community. And that leads to lower rates of assaults, lower rates of violent crime, increased mortality or improved mortality rates, I should say. And so again, their specific recommendations are having neighborhood walking and activity groups, having front porch housing designs, getting people out where they can know their neighbors, and focusing on activity hubs such as community centers, libraries, parks, and so forth. One of the more interesting presentations that we had this year at Active Living Conference was there was a gentleman promoting the use of libraries as physical activity promotion centers and how we could improve active living by using our local libraries. It was a really neat and maybe more unique approach, and I'm happy to provide the links to his presentations if you're interested in that approach. And then the idea of neighborhood events. We can create a lot of changes in policy, we can create a lot of changes in the built environment, but until people are more aware of those changes, then they still might not be likely to change their personal behavior or let their kids go out and play in those spaces until we really make sure that they are aware of all the cool changes that are being made. So in summary, I want to highlight that I really think that spending time outdoors is crucial for both physical and mental health, as well as cognitive and social well-being. But that spending time outside, we know, has links with whether or not people feel safe, safe from crime or safe from traffic, and that we can do things in our neighborhoods, both with changing the built environment and changing policies to make those spaces more walkable, to help create more social capital, maybe planned or unplanned interactions between residents. And that creating a sense of community connectedness, knowing and trusting your neighbor, being civically involved or involved in local organizations, improves their community satisfaction and is likely to influence how active they are in their community, physically active in their community. And that we know environments and policies that promote safety and being more connected with our neighbors, especially in outdoor spaces, can have a direct and indirect effects on their physical and mental health. So that is what I have for today. I know that was a lot of information. I wanted to show a couple of photos that I definitely practice what I preach. I spend a lot of time outside, whether it's hot or cold, year round, trying to encourage people to do the same. So I've provided my email address, and I'm definitely open for any questions you guys have.
Thank you so much, Gina. That was outstanding. We really appreciate you joining us, and love the role modeling pictures. Those are fantastic. I do want to open it up to the group to see if there are any questions for you right now. It would be fine if anyone who has a question wants to unmute themselves and ask Gina. We've got quite a bit of time for that if anyone is interested.
Hi, Gina. Great presentation as always. Quick question, as I was thinking about some of the things you were mentioning and just thinking about particularly the social cohesion part of it, I've just noticed anecdotally in my neighborhoods that pets play an important role in getting people outside. Can you talk at all about the role of pets in being active in nature, if there is any?
Absolutely. There is, and I think we have a mutual colleague that has done way more research and probably very more knowledgeable than I am on the subject, but there is a lot of evidence that say, you know, pets do get us outside. Maybe some of us would not go for a walk if we didn't have to take our dog out. And you're more likely to run into a fellow neighbor when you're out walking your dog. It increases your likelihood of visiting a park or a common space that you would then run into other people. So there is some evidence. I'm a little less familiar with it, but definitely there's a strong tie. I would say over all the pets, I think probably dogs are the most studied. I don't know as many people that take their pet snake for a walk. I'm hoping I don't run into them if they do. But I do think that the animal ownership in general, I think, is more likely to get people outside in general. Great question, Robin.
Did have a question come up in the chat about the idea of empty police cars parked in areas. You're interested in hearing a little bit more about that.
Oh, well, that was an anecdotal added because of my husband in law enforcement. I don't know if anyone's ever seen those. Sometimes they're kind of tricky and they put them along the highway so that way when you see them, you automatically slow down. And so some of it's for traffic calming purposes. To make sure that, you know, if you see a police car, whether there's someone in it or not, sometimes they put little cardboard people in it so you can't tell until you're right up on them. But they do that to help control people's speeding behavior, which then creates a safer environment for you know, people to walk and bike in those areas. I know that I've seen some of them used, and they'll move them around so that way, you know, they're not just sat there forever, but they'll put them in spaces to where sometimes people just need to recognize that there are police in the community. And if you're not outside a lot to see them actively patrolling, then I think having a shell car helps people realize that there are people in the community. And many of them, when I was living in South Carolina, they would have their police units that had their phone number. They had 911, but they'd also have a phone number for the police department. And it was one of their ways that they would encourage this community policing relationship, and that it was really important that people felt that they could trust police. And obviously these last few years, that's been a very important topic in our communities. And so I have several people that work in the area. A friend of mine in South Carolina runs a nonprofit called Serve and Connect, and her whole role is to connect people with the community with policing agencies to where they feel like they can have an open conversation about community issues. If you have more specific questions on that topic, I might actually refer you to her with Serve and Connect. Her husband was actually killed in the line of duty. That's how we were friends, and she was a police wife as well. And after that, her entire mission was to make sure that there was that she could build trust in communities.
That's great. Great information to share. I hope that nonprofit that you mentioned, Gina, has more of a national reach, or is it just South Carolina?
She has been growing it over the past, I think it's been 6 years, I think. Let me see if I can find the link to that really quick and put it up. Cassie is a really, really great spokesperson, and I will drop her website into the chat.
I think Robin just did.
Oh, thank you, Robin. Yeah.
Great.
I don't know, Robin, you were from USC as well. Did you know Cassie at all?
Yes, I did. Yeah, she took a terrible situation and tried to make something positive out of it. So pretty impressive person and organization.
You know, I had a question, but it looks like Michelle's got her hand raised, so I'd ask her if she wants to unmute. Feel free to ask yours first.
Sure. I was curious about what the threshold is for percentage of physical activity outside where you start to see those mental health and fits. Is it every time you get outside, or should we shoot for the majority of meeting our physical activity, or like recommendations to be outdoors to get that? Mostly curious for schools when recess is kind of short. Do they get the same benefit from 10 minutes outside as they would for an hour outside?
Gotcha. Okay, so I'm not for sure evidence-wise I can fully answer that question because, you know, there's minimal studies on the dose of outdoor. I think outdoor physical activity. I think there was recently an article that came out in European literature that talked about, you know, at least an hour a week of physical activity time outside, but I don't know that there's enough evidence to really translate that into policy at this point. I definitely think there's enough evidence to say that if it's an option, that the added benefits are well worth trying to vie for getting people outdoors. I just wrote a paragraph in my grant last week to discuss a lot of people are like, hey, we live in Kansas, getting outside all the time is not really feasible. And I said, well, the alternative is to tell people to stay inside for 6 or 7 months when it's cold or icky or too hot. And I don't think that that's a good solution either. And so a lot of my work I spend teaching people how to adapt to being outside. So if it's going to be hot, maybe go someplace outside that there's shade, you know, or go earlier in the morning. If it's going to be really cold, just be prepared for that and take a coat and gloves, you know, or an umbrella. And so I definitely see a difference between inclement weather and seasonal weather, and how there are some discussions out there right now about how kids need to stay inside at school if it's below a certain temperature or above a certain temperature. There are schools in Sweden that take 2-year-olds for preschool and they spend the entire day outside and they just know to prepare for that. And they teach them survival skills and they teach them how to spend time outside. So I think it's recognize that it's beneficial to be outside and that we will make a lot of excuses related to some of the barriers we could encounter. So it's really just what we can negotiate with the situations that we have. I know that's not the great answer for you, but my personal recommendation is if I could do physical activity outside versus inside, I would do it 100% of the time.
I
Thanks.
think you're making excellent points there, Gina, about just using that information to encourage those who influence policies or practices within settings to remember that getting outside is as important as being active, and how do we make sure we're not missing the mark on that? Matt, I think you had a question too.
Yeah. And Gina, I really appreciated the approach towards looking at the literature. And you mentioned mortality. I know where I live in Wyandotte County, the average life expectancy between West and Eastern Wyandotte County is as much as 24 years. And so I was wondering if your research had come across any sort of, natural experiments that looked at how, improving the built environment might actually improve the life expectancy, because you talked a lot about parks and trails. And I know in a lot of our redlined communities, that disinvestment has prevented those spaces from being improved. So I'm curious, are there any studies that looked at how the built environment improves over time and if that's tracking with improvement in life expectancy?
That is an excellent question. So I know initially, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation funded, huge national studies exploring and providing us that data that show that, even a few miles apart, that we see drastically, differences in our life expectancy, and that even controlling for things like their income, socioeconomic status, that the environment is linked with these findings. I don't know that they've had a ton of long-term studies at this point, as you can imagine. It's really difficult for researchers to partner with communities as they are actively planning and to get in on that early stage, to be able to have that baseline evidence and then track across many years. I know that there are some bigger studies that are in the process of doing that. One of the bigger studies that I was involved in was the Healthy Community Studies, and I know Russ Pate's group was looking at evaluating some of those things as they made changes and really fine-tune looking at changes in policy, and they did a lot of windshield audits where they drive through neighborhoods and audit many areas. But I don't know that I've seen a lot of big studies that are sort of finished and provided that strong evidence. Robin, are you aware of any that have come out since in the last couple of years?
No, I don't think so off the top of my head.
You've hit the nail on the head. This is what we need to be doing as researchers, and why I was so excited to be able to come and speak today, because when the community coalitions and a center like this collaborates with researchers, then we are more likely to have that, plan those studies and have that data to provide. So you guys are way ahead of the game for many other communities.
Thank you.
I do want to mention a comment that was shared in the chat because I think it's a great one. Your presentation, Gina, is a timely reminder of the importance of physical activity and the benefits of nature, especially for everyone who's been working long hours or days indoors throughout the pandemic, and the impact on their physical, emotional, mental health, all of those pieces. And I think we frequently forget how, when we're working at home, especially, how easy it is to get up and take a break and go outdoors, and just the feeling that it brings back to us. So they're suggesting that this is a great presentation for all healthcare professionals, and I think that's so right. So thank you again for being here with us today. Any other questions for Gina?
Shelley, I might add that I have the data from the active living presentations. We did study the effect of COVID on spending time outside and spending time inside over the past year. And so we do have some of that evidence, and I'm happy to share those presentations as well.
Excellent. That may be a presentation for another time.
Just before we end, I'm curious your thoughts on the age group between 11 and 15, these teens that are been restricted from all activities for long periods of time, and coming out of that, engaging with youth sports outside, all the activity. Are you finding any evidence that there are kids that have not re-engaged with sports? Because I know that the Aspen Institute has done some studies on that there's a 30% drop off in kids re-engaging with the sports they were connected to before COVID. Anything that would give any insight into that?
That's an excellent question, and I think it's a really valid concern. I haven't, it's not specifically an area that I've looked into, although I am currently part of a group that is doing a literature review of childhood physical activity during COVID. That one's actually being led by Bridget Doe out of USC California. And we are, I think they've got, wanting to say, over 100 articles that they're currently reviewing. And I actually meet with them tomorrow to discuss next steps on getting that information published. But I haven't reviewed the data yet. So after tomorrow, I might know more of their findings from the initial review of the literature. But we do recognize it as, you know, a lot of kids were home from school and not even getting their PE time. And how has that affected them? And you know, they're not learning the skills that they would have been learning in PE or the ability to enjoy physical activity. And they weren't having that access to recess. And so if they're at home and they're living in an unsafe neighborhood, then maybe they spent a lot of time indoors this last year as well. And there's going to be effects down the road in childhood obesity and in their skills that they're developing and their participation in sports for sure.
100%. Awesome. Thanks.
Lots of great topics coming up.
Thank you again for having me, Shelley. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Gina. It's always a pleasure having you here with us. And we're really glad to have you as a connection in research related to physical activity and getting back into nature. So,
and I'll just chime in and say extra big thanks, because she's in the middle of a huge grant mission process, and it takes a lot of time to do those things, and to donate her time to us this morning is very much appreciated. So thanks, Gina.
Well, and that's the other part I want to highlight. She is donating her time to do this. So thanks again, Gina. We really do appreciate it and value our relationship with you.
I do as well. And anytime you guys want me to come back, this is always such a great group, and I'm so ahead of the game. I'm so impressed coming back to Kansas and being able to be a part of this group. It's been a real treat. So I recognize that you guys have a really unique group that doesn't exist in other cities, and I really love being a part of this. So,
well, this is recorded, Gina, so we have that on. We have this in perpetuity. We've got your commitment.
Yep.
Okay, so just like Gina demonstrated role modeling in her presentation, we want to take 5 minutes for a physical activity break. This is something sort of new that we've done, and I want to give a big fat shout out to Bryce Miller, part of the Weighing In team, because this is a recorded physical activity break that he did for another partner that we have in the Kansas City area. This was a physical activity break that was shared at the CE3KC annual conference this year, which is hosted by the Junior League of Greater Kansas City. So with that, I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to turn it over to Matt, who's going to bring up the video, and we're going to take about 5 minutes for a physical activity break. I would encourage you all to keep your cameras on. but understand that that's impossible and you need to take an actual break.
Bryce from the Center for Children's Healthy Lifestyles and Nutrition at Children's Mercy, Kansas City, where we work to promote children's healthy lifestyles and physical activity in the Kansas City region. Today we're going to do some exercises and some stretches for you guys. Most of these can be done while you're sitting or while you're standing. So let's get right into it. The first one we're going to do, we're going to lock our fingers and we're going to stretch all the way up to the ceiling. Try to touch the stars. Get on your tiptoes a little bit, and then we're gonna bring our arms down, right behind our neck. Bring our elbows in, and let's rock back and forth. Right, left, left. Good job. All right, back up to the starting position, and now let's get some head circles in. You might hear some cracks, that's okay. Good, and now let's get our whole body involved and let's shake things out a little bit. Get ready for some of these main stretches. Awesome. Let's bring our arms up and we're gonna do some core twists. We wanna get a little bit of a wider stance. We're gonna go left, right. Nice, rock solid. Perfect. All right, and all this can be done in a seated position as well. It would be this type of variation. And we're gonna move on to the next drill. So we're gonna do some knee pulls. We'll start with our right. You wanna grab right below the knee, pull up towards our chest, hold it for about 5 seconds. It's okay if you lose your balance, find something next to you, find a table or a chair. You can hold your balance just like that. If you're seated, you can do this variation. Back to our right leg. Good job. All right, and then we're gonna transition to some toe touches. Touch our right toe. Try to hold that for about 5 seconds. If you can't touch your toe, that's totally fine. Just touch somewhere in your shin. See how far you can get down. 3, 2, 1. Awesome. If we're standing, it's going to look like this. See how far you can get down that shin. Try to touch your toes. Awesome. Nice and controlled. We can focus on our breathing in through our nose, out through our mouth. All right, we'll do a quick hamstring stretch now. Our right leg, we're gonna reach down, grab that foot, pull up towards our butt. Good, hold for about 5 seconds. Awesome, left side. 2, 1, good job. If you're in the seated position, it looks about like this. Get a good stretch in. If you're not able to grab your foot, that's okay. The variation would just be leaning back and trying to reach down with your hand as far as you can. Good. All right, on to the next one. We're gonna get a glute stretch in now. When we're sitting all day at home, this is a good stretch to make sure that things are activated. Our big muscles in our body are activated while we're sitting down. So we're gonna bring our right leg up, set our ankle on our leg. We can lean forward for a better stretch. Hold it. And we can lift up on that leg just slightly. Good. We'll go to the other leg. If you're standing up, it looks something like this. Good. Lift it up a little. Okay. And our last one. Let's connect our fingers again. Let's reach to the stars. And let's slowly flow down into a forward fold. Grab those elbows. We can sway to the left and the right. Left, right, sitting down, looks like this. Left, right, and good. There we go, guys. Thanks for joining me. These are all exercises you can do at home. And as we're sitting at home, if you're working from home or in a seated position throughout the day, these are fantastic ways to get moving in an easily accessible way. Thanks.
I hope you all had a chance to get your blood pumping. Thanks, Bryce, who's here live as well.
Thanks for joining me.
That was great. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to share my screen again and go back to our meeting agenda. So now I'd like to take a little bit of time to share updates from each of our different sectors for the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan. I'm going to go ahead and start with Healthy Schools. So we have both Emily, who's the weighing in support for Healthy Schools, and Michelle Dake, who is the sector co-lead on. So I'm going to turn it over to the two of you to share an update on the schools working group.
Great, thanks, Shelly. I'll go ahead and jump in, and Michelle, feel free to add along. Michelle's going to be helping lead our breakout session as well today. So we'll give a few updates, but please join that breakout if you're interested in learning more after the updates. So the Healthy Schools group, since our last quarterly meeting over the last few months, identified some first action step areas for the physical activity plan to implement. And one of the things that the group worked on was promoting in a collaborative way the Bike to School Day in 2021 and also Bike Month. So came together to share resources and spread that work and align the efforts across the group. So that was in May this year, and adapted a bit with COVID for that Bike to School promotion. And so we'll be continuing to think about what that might look like in terms of one of the practices identified in the Safe Routes to School framework, and that Safe Routes to School and active transportation is part of that first strategy in the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan under the schools sector. So that's one thing the group has on the radar to continue thinking about how to work together on that broad strategy, including those promotions of bike and walk to school days and what makes sense in terms of collaborative action. And then on the radar for the schools group is also to do some reconnecting and re-engaging with school partners and new school partners and existing school partners, just to sort of reassess the lay of the land for this next school year, with things still being not 100% back to normal with COVID, sort of re-listening and finding those opportunities to align the school's strategies with where school partners are at right now and where community partners who work with schools are at right now. So those are some of the things on the agenda. And again, if you would like to learn more, please join our breakout session after this. Michelle, anything you want to add to that?
No, you did a great job.
Thanks, Emily. And I'm going to keep you on the hook for just a second to give an update on early childhood, along with Rhonda Earple being the sector lead for early childhood.
Great, thanks, Shelly. And again, Rhonda and Lori are both here for our breakout session. So if you want to learn more, we'll give a really quick update here, and we'll talk more in our breakout after this. The early childhood sector identified a couple of different first action steps for the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan. One was to do a little deeper engagement of some of our early childhood community leaders. And so a group formed at the end of May or at the end of March, excuse me, and met through the end of May. And these were really some of the leaders and influencers in the early childhood, early care and education community, some both director of center-based programs as well as small business owners in the family child care sector. And that group looked at the physical activity plan and helped us identify some of the most important first action steps and gaps and needs in the community to be able to implement that physical activity plan, those strategies in early childhood, since most of those strategies are really targeting the early care and education sector. So it's really important that we did some re-listening to those leaders in that sector and those community members in that sector to make sure that we are headed in the right direction. So we'll share a little bit more about that, but we definitely see, and they identified a need for some additional new and kind of next or expert level professional development and opportunities to collaborate with one another around implementing physical activity best practices within their programs and policies within their programs. And when Gina was talking about weather and Kansas weather, I kept thinking about early care and education programs. They're so innovative and they're so dedicated to getting kids children outside in all sorts of weather, and it's no small feat when you have young children. And so I'm thinking about how, and they identified lots of barriers around that too. So thinking about how we can support as a system children being outside in those programs. So again, more information in the breakout. The other thing I wanted to lift out from the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan within the best practices strategy, the group had identified Move Smart and Go Knapsack, two best practice programs. Move Smart is a recognition program on the Missouri side that early care and education programs can receive if they meet certain best practices, evidence-based best practices for physical activity within their program. And so the group has aligned with the Missouri Council on Physical Activity and Nutrition to promote that in the first part of this year. And with the leadership of Lisa Farmer-Lauer, being the state lead for Move Smart. And that program has seen a significant increase in the number of early care and education providers taking their training and starting that application process for that recognition. So that's a huge success, joint success between the Physical Activity Plan and the Missouri Council on Physical Activity and Nutrition. Lisa has seen an increase in January and February. They got an average of 3 to 4 folks taking that initial training, that first step for Move Smart recognition. And in the last few months, it's been closer to 70 to 80 total have taken that training. So more like 30 to 40 per month. So a huge increase there and lots of promotion happening of that program. So if you're interested in promoting that, again, come to the breakout and learn more. But a nice way to align with some state infrastructure around physical activity best practices.
Thanks, Emily. Now I'll turn it over to Matt for an update on what's going on with Parks and Rec and infrastructure.
Thanks, Shelley. Yeah, we're obviously going to have a lot more to share in the breakout room, but I'll put a couple links in the chat for those of you that maybe are interested but aren't able to participate in the breakout rooms. We've been having monthly working group meetings that emerged out of the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan with the two distinct Parks and Recreation and infrastructure sector working groups. And they recognize that so much of this work in improving the built environment, as Gina talked about, is interrelated, and it is a lot to learn from each other. And so that group has been meeting monthly. We just met last month with the Healthy Schools group. And one thing that emerged from our April meeting, we talked about policies and initiatives, and we talked about Vision Zero and complete streets ordinances. But one of them was about the surface transportation program. And we've had a small working group from the working group, the larger PAPI group, meeting the last couple of weeks to review and propose new criteria to the Mid-America Regional Council on how physical activity can be incentivized through how counties and local governments apply for federal funding for road projects. It's kind of an exciting idea to think that we can have a policy level that would affect the entire region and do that through a scoring criteria that allows for better connection in that walkability, in that bike access and park access through our roads and areas that are connected in the built environment. So that's a really fun update that I'll talk about in our breakout room. There's also updates on the two mini grant projects that have been supported through the UMKC Health Equity Institute. One of them, Central Connection Walk Audit. It's also kind of sometimes known as Central to Central. It worked with middle school students at Central Middle and KC-Mo and helped connect through a walking audit with Bike Walk KC and Dr. Amanda Grimes' Move More, Get More program to look at how to better improve the connections for youth using the park area at Central Park just across Linwood Boulevard. That project has some great photos I can share. And there's also another Health Equity Institute grant project that I've worked on with Groundwork NRG in Northeast Kansas City, Kansas. They had a green team, and they've been, like Gina talked about, not being explicitly focused on physical activity, but they're using green infrastructure and kind of vacant lot projects to connect spaces within neighborhoods. And the youth worked with neighborhood leaders to propose what they would like to see in their neighborhood. And so that project is another effort funded by the UMKC HEI group. the last thing is that we have upcoming meetings. We meet the last Wednesday of every month. So our next one will be on community recreation. If you're interested or have any recommendations on who might be a good person to come visit with us, we work with the sector co-leads on this group are Laura Steele from Blackwell KC and Jen Judd from KCMO Parks and Rec. But we're also looking to have another meeting in July that we're going to be focusing on accessibility. So we got a couple of great people in mind, but if you have any suggestions or any thoughts on those two topics, community rec and accessibility, feel free to let us know and join the breakout room, and we can talk more later in this meeting.
Yeah, thanks for those updates, Matt. Those are great. And just as a little reminder, we will have in a slide coming up a QR code that will take you to a way to sign up for newsletters that can get you this information and access to all the dates for the upcoming work group meetings and such. So I have the pleasure of giving the updates on faith-based settings and then healthcare. Faith-based settings has been working to use their connections to promote physical activity and to host events promoting physical activity and connecting to chronic disease. So they have had a couple of opportunities to offer opportunities for vaccinations. And so with that, these are a couple of pictures from one that was hosted, I think toward the end of May, where they took the opportunity to promote physical activity as well. That group recognizes the challenges in faith-based settings and is really taking an opportunity to just start bringing back up the issue of being physically active and how to engage people in just moving more. And so in the picture on your left, it's Pastor Eric Williams, who is one of the sector co-leads for faith-based settings. And to his right is Tony Temple, who's a great partner of ours, who is has his own business where he promotes physical activity with a real focus on youth. So we were excited to be able to make that partnership and support that event that they just hosted. So we're excited to see more things like that come out of our connections with faith-based groups. In terms of healthcare, we're focusing on a few different priorities right now. We are getting ready to start a Walk with the Doc / healthcare professional program. That's going to be in conjunction with some support from the Kansas Hospital Association. Because the support is coming from the Kansas Hospital Association, the initial location has to be on the Kansas side. So we partnered with Wyandotte County Parks and Recreation and have chosen Pearson Park as the location for our Walk with the Doc program. We have a team that's sort of a subgroup of the healthcare sector who's working on implementing this and the planning and logistics around the Walk with the Doc program. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the breakout session for healthcare. So I'm happy to share a little bit more. And if anybody's interested, invite anyone to join our effort. Another component that the healthcare sector group is working on is really thinking about reimbursement for physical activity counseling. We know that in the healthcare sector, it's very challenging to add additional conversations when there's no reimbursement for those conversations. We also know it takes quite a bit of time. So we have a couple of providers who have been billing for physical activity counseling, and we're going to be exploring how successful that billing is in terms of reimbursement so that we can promote specific codes or other opportunities for providers to engage in those conversations. And the third thing that we're really focusing on that aligns with the strategies of the healthcare sector work group is including physical activity in curriculum for health professional schools broadly. Where we've had a little bit of success recently is starting a bit smaller. So including physical activity and lifestyle education as part of specific lectures that are currently being provided for med students. So I can share a little bit more about that in the breakout session, but those are sort of the three main areas that we've seen a little bit of movement related to the strategies for the healthcare sector. So with that, I'd like to invite Dr. Shook to share a couple of updates on two new sectors that are starting, sport and mass media.
Hi there. Very excited to tell you about two new sectors that we've got started. So as some of you may remember, just due to capacity of weighing in, we decided to break the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan sector rollouts into two parts. So last year we did the sectors that we just talked about. And in 2021, we're adding two remaining sectors, sport and mass media. These two sectors are really key components of the physical activity system that we live in. Sport is obviously very, very important in how many youth obtain their physical activities, levels of physical activity. Adults, not as much, but I think that that's changing and there are lots of opportunities there. Mass media is probably the most under-recognized contribution to physical activity that we have in society, simply because a lot of the things that Gina was talking about today, how we frame what exactly physical activity is. It looks like a lot of different things. It can be kids playing in a sports league. It can be running a 5K. It can be doing an activity at your church. It can be walking your dog around the block. And mass media helps us communicate what exactly physical activity is and why it's important. So super excited to bring both of these on this year. Mass media is just starting. They've only had one or two meetings. We've got two great co-leads. One is Melinda Shaheen from UMB Bank. She's senior marketing executive with UMB Bank. So that's kind of the marketing piece. The other co-lead is Toriano Porter of the Kansas City Star editorial board. I don't know if you read the Star, but he's an excellent writer. He's also written several books, some more kind of traditional media communication. So Matt Kleiman is the weighing in support for that. Matt, I don't know if you have any additional comments. Again, they just started meeting. So keep your eyes open for opportunities to engage in that group over the next several months. Sport is a little bit further along, and we have we have two great co-leads. I'll tell you a little bit more about them in the breakout room. But one is Pastor Adrian Roberson. He leads a group called KC United that's been around for decades. Anyone who knows KCK knows Pastor Roberson, I'm learning. The other lead is, he was on earlier in this meeting, but I think he had to step off, Bill Brandmeier from ShareWaves. ShareWaves is a component of 810 WHB, the radio station, sports radio station. So there are two excellent co-leads. We could not have picked two individuals more capable of leading this group. Bryce Miller and I are the sector leads or sector supports for the sports sector. We have our first sector meeting on Tuesday, June 15th from 3 to 4. I pasted the link to our invitation in the chat. So if you're interested in participating, you can just click on that link and you'll get all the information you need. If you need more information, feel free to reach out to me or Bryce directly. Come to the breakout session if you're interested. We'll have more information there.
Thanks for that great update, Robin. And we're really excited to be able to launch those two new sectors this year. So now I'm going to take a couple of minutes to open the floor for anyone else who's on the call right now to share any updates they have and would like others here in the meeting to know about. Not hearing anything. I'll keep moving to keep us on track in terms of time. And if anyone does think of something they want to share with the group, please feel free to share it in the chat. And we'll work to get that information out in other ways as well. So a couple of weighing in reminders. I just want to be sure to highlight, follow us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. You can see from the slide I have here, our most recent partner spotlight was with Girls on the Run. I want to thank their executive director, Gina Lichty, who took some time to talk with me about spending time in the garden. So it's incorporating physical activity and getting out into nature. We're really thrilled to have them as a partner with the Children's Mercy Hospital Garden. That was a great opportunity. That QR code that you see on the screen can be used to sign up for any of the newsletters or information about the different sector work groups and meetings that are going on. As always, we like to tie it back to our healthy lifestyle message, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fantastic. And if you're not following us on social media, you just missed the really great video that we released this week it's a cute little cooking demonstration. So we're trying to do a little bit more of those social media posts that are engaging. So I'd encourage you to look for that on Facebook or Instagram. I'm not going to show it to you here because I really want you to join us in social media. The last announcement I want to make before we go into our breakout groups is a huge thank you to both Emily Meisen-Sebelius and Elizabeth Wilson. Both are leaving us by the end of this month, and we cannot thank you enough. Sorry for this. I will miss Emily terribly. She's been around for quite a while. She is a huge asset to us in our work. Sorry. And again, I just want to say thank you. I've highlighted a couple of pictures from the time that she spent with us. She's been extremely instrumental in growing our early childhood working group, engaging others. She is passionate about this work. She's an excellent leadership, and an excellent leader, and I want to thank you for all of the accomplishments and your thoughtfulness with everything you've done related to weighing in. So thanks. I also want to recognize Elizabeth Wilson, who's been a graduate research assistant with us for the last couple of years. You may not have had a chance to meet Elizabeth, but Elizabeth has been very instrumental related to the physical activity plan, sort of behind the scenes. It is because of her great efforts that we were able to put together and release the physical activity report card. You can see that on the bottom of the screen, and in the top was Elizabeth presenting at the Active Living Conference when we were in person about a year ago. So with that, before I absolutely lose it, I want to remind the group that we're going to go into breakout sessions. The breakout rooms are going to be Healthy Schools. Bryce is going to be the support in that room. Early Childhood, Emily is going to go ahead and manage that for us today. Matt is going to lead one breakout room for physical activity in parks and infrastructure. I will be in healthcare. Elizabeth Wilson, if you want to meet her, is going to be in the faith-based settings breakout room. And then Robin is going to be supporting sport. Before we move into that, I do want to encourage you all to complete the evaluation. There's a QR code on the bottom of the screen to do that. And we have a quick polling question for you. So one of the reasons I have in this slide a TBD date for the quarterly meeting is because we want to get your feedback on the ability to move back to in-person quarterly meetings. So I'd like you to take just a minute to answer those questions about the options that you're most comfortable with. So we'd like you to tell us what you're comfortable with and then which one you prefer. We will use that information to decide how we're going to host our quarterly meeting in September. And and want to make sure it's as accessible to as many of you as possible. So Matt, I'm going to give this a few minutes. I'd like to leave this QR code up too for people to check that out for evaluation. The last thing I'll mention while people are still completing the poll is as we go into the breakout rooms, there's a couple of things I want you to think about. You can move between breakout rooms. So some don't have a lot of additional information to share. So if you choose some of those breakout rooms that are really just there to gather interest, when those are done, we're going to sort of dismiss from the breakout rooms. If you want to see if there's another breakout room that's still meeting that you're interested in, feel free to change between breakout rooms. Because I can't see the chat right now, I'm not sure if anybody has any questions about how to access the breakout rooms. So I'm going to pause for a second and see if there are any questions related to that we should answer.
I can launch the questions in a second, Shelley. I just want to point out what we saw on the poll. It looked like people were comfortable with a lot of options, but a hybrid was the one that people said they were most comfortable with overall. But then on the preference, people really did prefer in person. So you should be able to see those results. Thanks for everyone that participated.
Yeah, thanks for launching that too, Matt. Okay.
I'll go ahead and launch the breakout rooms. It should be pretty simple. Everybody can join. And just to clarify, I think Shelley mentioned it earlier, but some breakout rooms you might be in as a longer meeting, and some of them might be a relatively short update. But we won't be gathering back together in this space. So when you leave the breakout room, you're leaving the meeting and go on with the rest of your day. So don't worry about trying to come back here, and I'll open them all up, stay on for just a minute, but you should all be able to quickly join the one you want to be a part of.
I'm going to stop sharing so we can do that. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a great rest of the week. If I don't see you in the breakout room.
Cool.
Hey there.
Like we got one or two more people joining us.
I feel like I just saw you.
Yeah, looks like early childhood's got a good group going. Faith-based has got a couple people. Healthcare's got a couple people. Robin's all alone in sport. But yeah, you're familiar with some of the updates, so I won't spend too much time.
Yeah.
Allison, I don't know if we've had the pleasure.
Oh, hi, I'm Allison. I work with Nicole at Johnson County.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll keep this short and sweet so y'all can get on with your day. I'm happy to spend more time talking. I'm just curious before we get going, what'd y'all think of Gina's presentation?
Oh, I liked it. You know, I've seen things like that before.
Oh no, Nicole, we might have lost you. Okay, looks like
I think I saw her physical prescription talk a couple years ago, was it?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, she was great.
Good. I hadn't seen the prescription before, but I've been familiar with some of the research initiatives she's a part of. So she's doing great work. I'm going to share my screen just real quick. This is just a very simple update because I think we're all kind of aware and obviously have more time to work on our day. It would be nice. But I do want to give a quick update. Allison, I don't know if you're familiar, but there is the KCPA plan website, which is where a lot of this information about these different sectors is shared.
Okay.
And Nicole's been very involved in a lot of it. And infrastructure and parks have unique strategies. And so they're very similar. And that's part of the reason why the PAPI work group kind of merged. It was this idea that we're talking about working with communities to improve the built environment, whether that's in a park or in a trail. It seems very similar. So we definitely worked on enough similarities that it made sense to keep our efforts aligned and learn from each other. Let's see if I can move my bar here. For the HEI grants I was talking about earlier, we did a walking audit. These were actually the same day, these two mini projects, I mentioned them. But we had a walking audit with the Move More, Get More kids. Bike Walk KC came out and helped run the audit. Andrea Clark from KC Healthy Kids was there too. But the Move More, Get More program is really Dr. Amanda Grimes' program that she helps run. And they created an audit, learning from examples, kind of like Gina's on like, you know, how do you rate about the street crossings and the sidewalks? And you can kind of see that what they were looking into, like how it makes you feel and what's the quality of the built environment. So that was something that I was interested in seeing if that came up in Gina's presentation. But there were a lot of kind of, you know, trash, debris, inconvenient, you know, curb cuts or lack thereof. And then at the end of it, they had some food that they gave away and a whole kind of fitness field day event for the kids on the football field. So that was a fun activity that we got people out and about for. The other one, this is one that I was more involved in. It was the same day. It was working with Groundwork Energy's green team. And so they wrote a story, and I think I can share my video. I hope this doesn't screw up too much, but there's a whole video that KCPT did where they documented the day, and I'd worked with them for a couple of weeks. And so we got youth voices. They kind of became the leaders. They're high school students, and they worked with Groundwork Energy, which is a local environmental justice group, but they work in vacant lots, and that was related to the strategies from the KCPA plan. So we applied together for a mini grant that helped them develop a tool to tell them what would they do in the vacant lot space. So the tool was a mapping exercise, and I met with the youth and kind of introduced some of the concepts to them. And they did research. It's kind of like a youth service learning project. They did research on green infrastructure, and then they did canvassing in the neighborhood and brought residents out who received stipends for their time, and the youth got to place those markers around the map. So it's a really cool video, and there's a story behind it that you can read up on too, and I can share that link in the chat. The only other kind of update the sector can give is this is about the STP criteria, and this is what Nicole, I think Haley Weinberg, Alex Rottenberry, Andrea Clark, and Michael Kelly have helped to do from the PAPI working group. And I'm going to zoom out in a second, but just this is kind of the most important area. There's like 120 some points across roads, bridges, bike, pedestrian infrastructure, all different types of facets that receive federal funding. And they previously had these concepts that would score the criteria. So every submission from Johnson County or Wyandotte County or Jackson County, they'd say, we're going to give you a certain number of points. And the way they did it was they gave you 10 points if you, quote, improved 3 modes of level of service. And of course, that's not exactly the most clear definition. There's not a lot of, there's no additional context. And so to get this approved, it's going to take a little bit of deliberation with Mid-America Regional Council, but the small group that met over the last couple of weeks proposed an alternative approach towards the criteria. And the kind of idea was, what's the low-hanging fruit here? And so we're going to seek to get this into a space where we can apply it. But the consensus was, could we break up those 10 points into 5 scoring criteria that if the project does it, they get 2 points. And if it does not do that, they don't get those points. And the hope is that that encourages actual transportation choices in public health. That's a little bit more, it sparks a little bit more creative thought in terms of how the proposed project actually does that. And so one of them is increased, improve access to non-motorized transit facilities, expands access to existing amenities like parks and trails, improves visibility and public safety. That kind of relates to Gina's presentation in high crash areas. Improves access to physical activity in areas that are considered environmental justice tracks, which is a proxy for health equity. And then references and aligns with regional plans, kind of like the KCPA plan, but also these other initiatives like Mid-America Regional Council has. They're planning Bike Walk KC, Vision Zero, that it's mentioned is a way to score points, that it's embodying those priorities. But the overall planning document's pretty large. And so we don't have a ton of opportunities to work on it, but whenever there's a reference to public health, that's where we're trying to introduce that language that I just shared. So there's opportunities to have a big impact across the region by tweaking these criteria to be a little bit more helpful and a little bit more specific on public health issues. And so that's kind of the big picture on those. The last thing I'll share is that we do have a newsletter. I put this out about the middle of each month to promote the next PAPI working group meeting. And so we shared the link in the chat, and I can share it again with you all, but trying to, I'm in the progress of it right now. But I work on this with Jen and Laura just to kind of put it together, touch base with them. We share past meetings, we update future meetings. It's a great, I think, resource. I'm biased, but I think it's a good resource. And I try to share some news that's relevant to parks or infrastructure. Chris Harris just did a golf course in Kansas City. That's pretty awesome. Just using vacant lots. There's a webinar on transportation related to physical activity coming up at a federal level. I know Kansas City Library is doing work in public parks, and then KDOT has a active transportation plan meetings coming up. And so trying to get that out before those meetings happen. And then sharing any updates from the physical activity, the KCPAPI working group meetings. And so there's always a link to those meeting notes as well. And there's a lot of good stuff that gets shared. And I think our, Nicole, we talked about, I think the biggest thing that the Healthy Schools and the PAPI group said was really prioritizing safe routes, whether that's safe routes to schools or safe routes to parks. That was a big feature that groups really wanted to get more involved in. And then, in terms of what everybody that showed up to the meeting thought kids needed more is they thought they needed more small pocket parks within walking distance. Basically, places you could be physically active and you didn't have to drive to or rely upon your parents to drive you to. So we've been having really good discussions, and I think it's nice to see some of those early action projects like the walking audits and the Green Team Toolkit actually, go from plan to strategy and policy to actually turning dirt and making some improvements. And so it's kind of a challenge sometimes to get there, but hopefully continue to work on it.
So one thing that I'm hoping, if we can ever have a little less COVID duty around here, that I'm hoping to do is Allison has worked on our SVP grant, which is a sexual violence prevention project. And through that, they have done a lot of CEPTED training in the community. And that, and Allison, I can't remember if I sent this to you or not, but the stuff the Green Team did very much aligns with the CEPTED type framework. With the community involvement and all those kinds of things to make improvements in neighborhoods and whatnot. So I'm sort of really looking forward to trying to figure out how we could maybe marry some of that, because we also have a Safe Routes to School grant coming from Mark, if we can ever get the paperwork back from KDOT. I'm just saying everything today, aren't I? But anyway,
Nicole, we are recording, so be careful who you
yes. Well, it's just everything's slow on our end. We were slow. Everything is a process. You know how that goes. So it's our fault too. But anyway, I'm really looking forward to how we could maybe kind of marry those projects, to get some youth involved with all of those things. I think it just is a cool opportunity for us. And I'm kind of looking forward to seeing how we could maybe kind of involve adults working with the youth on that and trying to find some cool projects, either to parks or schools or whatever. So that's one idea we have cooking here that we're interested in trying. And I think there's one other county in the metro that has that funding. I can't be sure though. So I just need to research that too.
I bet it's Wyandotte County.
I was going to say it is. Yep, it is Wyandotte.
So
Okay.
WICO, SAP, and MOXA are the two that really push CEPTED. I have friends in those spaces. I think one of the reasons for the Green Team Toolkit being implemented in the first place, and we have a presentation about it when we applied for the funding, was that there's, amongst architects and urban planners, there's sort of a national call to let's stop using CEPTED, crime prevention through environmental design. And I say this carefully. it's a great strategy, but the tactic of it could be improved upon. The strategy of working with your community to improve safety in the built environment is excellent. The way that it's done typically is you work with your community police officers and you kind of do training and, block by block review. And you look for what's called defensible space, areas that have good sight lines, visible, and you're basing it kind of on this idea of broken windows theory of policing, which is anytime you see a broken window, maybe you need more policing. Anytime you see more trash or litter, you need more policing. And that's a challenge in some of the communities, at least that I work with. That might not be the case in every community. But the question mark was, do we need to increase a police presence to increase safety? And I think Gina talked about that with that empty cop car. And I know that there are groups that I work with that may not feel as safe if they see cop cars patrolling and following them. And so that becomes, okay, let's go back to the strategy. Let's work with communities. But instead of relying upon a police approach, what if we worked with kids at the local school? And so I've been pushing for that with the Green Team Toolkit. It adapted a method we had used previously years ago with active living trails in Wyandotte County. And so what was kind of beautiful is the kids took it and ran with it. They made it their own. They did research on it. Like they're getting educational work, architecture design. They're learning about green infrastructure. Like they're getting paid for it. So you're actually kind of bringing them alongside as leaders. And that I think could be a model for more of that in the future. The one thing I'll say about it is already Adrian Robertson, who's a co-lead of the sports sector, he's seen this and wants to use it for, there's a Northwest Middle School in Kansas City, Kansas, that when they tore down the old school, they built a new school, but they forgot or chose not to build a track for the kids. And so they have to bus the kids to the nearest park every day if they want to do anything PE or sports related. And that's just a burden on the school, and it's a burden on the coaches, and it's a burden on the kids. And so he wants to get a summer field day event and use this approach of, let's work with kids, let's roll out a big map, let's have them learn about the spaces they want to use, ask them to identify them in that space, document the heck out of it, and then bring that back to people with resources and decision-making power to put that into effect. And so it's not that CPTED in and of itself is not the right tool. It's just that how do we do it in a way that builds that social cohesion through the process of improving the environment? So I think it's a great model, but there's other ones out there.
Yeah, well, and I think we are just thinking in terms of trying to get more youth involved with projects and working on the safety aspect and not really relying so much on the theme of the other funding. It's just to get more community involvement. And I think it'd just be cool to involve some more youth in all of our programming. We have great success with that when we do tobacco prevention stuff.
Right.
And so it's just a great model. So we're just trying to figure out how we could do some other stuff and marry up some of our projects, because I think you get more mileage out of them if you can expand your base.
And so a great example, I was on a webinar just recently about service learning. It was Youth Service America. And they're like, national experts and how those types of projects emerge. I'll share a link with y'all in the chat. This isn't really related to PAPI necessarily, but it's they had incredible resources and tools. And I think I know what we're doing in KCK with the Green Team, trying to connect them, because all the students came from Sumner Academy. And so we reached out to the teachers. I know one of them who has, teaches architecture and building. They got 40 kids that want to do something with them in the fall now.
Oh, that's great.
And so are there links with teachers to say, hey, your kids are tired of being behind a screen inside. Here is a service learning component that we can tee up for you. It's going to take this much involvement, but in the process, you're going to do a walking school bus with us. We're going to walk the neighborhood. We're going to, get a map. And then at the end of the day, we're going to have an idea of, what route is the best route, what park is the best park, what needs to get built, and having kids say that. I think on the back end makes it so much more powerful when you want to kind of cut through the bureaucratic red tape to go up to a city planner, a public works department official,
Mhm.
a elected official, or a school board member and say, you think that this isn't an issue, but I got 50 kids behind me or at the mic saying it is.
Yeah.
And so I think that approach towards getting more physical activity in our parks and infrastructure, I think has some merit. But I think it takes a deeper partnership with the programs that are doing that work than what we currently have. But at our last May PAPI meeting, that conversation came up of who's doing this work already. So like Girls on the Run, Young Women on the Move. There's so many, 2020 leadership. There's so many youth ambassador program type organizations that ought to be invited to be a part of this process.
Yep.
Allison, we threw a lot at you. You should come to our meetings if you think this stuff's interesting. But any thoughts? Any questions?
Well, I sort of have Allison hooked in a little bit anyway, because Jill and I are going to be leading the public health sector here sometime when we think health departments can dig out a little bit. And so Allison is probably going to help us with that. Maybe she didn't know that till just now, but.
Yeah, no, you told me. No, that's great.
So she'll be getting involved. She's been involved with weighing in for a long time, at least attending the meetings and various things. So
great.
We'll get it all figured out.
Sounds good. Well, I'll let you all get back to your day if you want. You don't need to stick around here. Just look for the invites and the newsletters.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. Thanks, Matt. We'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Yep.
Goodbye.
You too. Bye.